Now, before we begin the last chapter, I do want to point out something that we've pointed out many times so far, and I guess this is going to be the last time. That the chapters are not natural. They're not in the Tanakh itself. If you were to go through the Tanakh as it's written on a scroll form, you would not find chapters. The chapters are a later invention of Christian monks, Catholic monks of some sort. They made up the numbering system. We happen to keep it because it's pretty helpful. It's pretty useful, but it's not actually ours. So, as I mentioned many times, I would not put the breaks in the same place that they put them. I don't know what led them to make their chapter breaks where they did, but okay, that's what we have. So the fact that it's the last chapter is kind of, uh, you know, a, it doesn't have a specific meaning necessarily. We're already in the winding down of the book. That's what we started last week. With the final verses of chapter 11, we began the what I called the winding down of the Sefer. At this point, King Solomon is trying to uh, bring home some of the concepts. And what we saw last week was that he finally identified who the reader is, who his intended audience is. Okay, as we said last week, it's important, for example, in marketing, which I've done a little bit of, I've done a little work in marketing, so I've learned this. One of the most important things as a marketer you have to do is figure out who your intended audience is, and then you can gear your advertisements towards that audience. Um, that's why you'll notice news stations on television happen to have a lot more drug commercials because the audience is usually a little bit of an older audience who are in that stage of their life where they need to ask their doctor about such and such, right? So similarly, at this point, King Solomon's now he's identifying the intended audience, and he said last week, even though this tends to be known or considered by many people as an older person's book, it's actually the intended audience is somebody who's young. He's trying to impart the wisdom of the elderly person onto a younger audience and try to get them to do better with their lives while they still have the time, while they're still in a more um, uh, able state, I would say. Okay, and so that's what we're going to see this week. We're going to continue with this discussion. Let's jump into the screen share. Okay, there's that. I assume you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing. There's our text there. And, oh, you know what? I forgot to do before we go into that. Let me put up our link. Okay. In the chat, I just placed our link in case you'd like to review anything, catch up on anything. Please feel free to check up the Portland Colo website. All right. So there's that. Okay. Now we can take a look at this. Again, it's going to be chapter 12, verse number 1. Okay. And once again, looking at the last two verses, he said, "Be happy, young man, in your childhood. Have your heart be good for you in your adolescence. Go in the ways of your heart. Remove anger from your heart." And we learn that to be, when he says heart in this case, he seems to be indicating your path forward in life. As you're choosing your path forward in life, do it without anger. Don't have anger be the motivating factor that makes your life decisions. As I said last week, you notice a lot of people are motivated by anger a lot nowadays, particularly on social media, on the internet, in politics, and all sorts of places. Hate is a very strong motivator. So he tells us, do not be the type of person who's motivated by anger. Be motivated by passion. Be motivated by things that you care about, that you love, but not by anger. Anger is a bad way to decide your future. Okay. And so he says like this, and it's clear to me that this should be connected to the previous verses. Again, I am totally at a loss for why they put a chapter break here. It says, Uzkor et borecha bimei bechurotecha. Remember your borecha. We'll discuss that in a second. Simply put, practically speaking, that probably means remember your creator in the days of your adolescence, in the days of your youth. Ad asher lo yavo'u yemei hara'ah. Before they come, or until they have not come, the bad days. All right. So, in other words, that's kind of a Hebrew construction that we don't really have in English so much. So, in other words, remember your creator in your youth before the days of bad come. Vihigiu shanim, and they reach to you the years, asher tomar, in which you say, ein livahem chefetz, that I do not have desire in them. Okay? So again, remember, let's read it one more time all together. Remember your creator in the days of your youth, before the bad days come. And the years come by, asher tomar, that you say, ein livahem chefetz, that I do not have desire in them. Okay? Now, there's a lot of different meanings here in this verse. There's a lot of interpretations in this verse. So let's get into what the words themselves actually mean. And you'll notice if you go through the commentaries over here, you'll find that there's a lot of discussion about what this word borecha means. Most of the translators I saw that I had access to, they all translate borecha as your creator, which again, that's kind of the simple explanation. There's a problem with that. The problem that shows up with that is if it was remember your creator simply, it should be lizkor et boracha, not borecha. Something about that construction, the word construction is a little off. There's that yud over there that makes it a little strange. And that's where you get into a lot of the discussions about what it is. Let's go with the simple explanation again. So to remember your creator in the times of your youth. That's a pretty run of the mill, I would say, admonition or advice from an elderly Torah scholar, an elderly wise man, particularly of the faithful wise person, who we're assuming Kohelet was, or assuming King Solomon was. And he says, even in your youth, remember your creator. Okay, remember where you come from. Remember what the purpose of everything is. Again, I would say that's probably a very normal thing for him to suggest as a spiritual guide. But I think there is multiple layers of meaning in this because of the fact that he wrote it in this funny way. I saw one of the commentaries rendered borecha as not borei, which would be creator, but briut, which means health. Right? So if you ever sneeze in Israel, people will yell at you, la briut, right? To your health. So it's a briut means health. So they will understand that this would be sorry, I have a little something in my throat, I guess. To take advantage of your health as you're a young person. Right? So again, if the target audience over here is really a younger audience, so then he's telling them, remember your health while you have it. Take advantage of it, in other words, right? So zachor would not necessarily mean remember in the typical sense, but would be more of an idea of put into action your health while you have your health, while you're a younger person. Okay, so take advantage of the health while you have it. It's kind of a funny thing, and I know I'm guilty of this. I'm a little bit on the younger side, I would say, it's hard to convince yourself as a younger person that you won't always be this healthy, that you won't always be, I could gain a little weight because I'll lose it. It's not that big of a deal. It's, things like that. So it's important to have that message from an older generation that says, take care of it while you have it, because it's a lot harder to take care of it as you get older. So that, I think, is also a very good lesson to take away. I think it's a very important thing that King Solomon's telling us, a very important piece of wisdom, that if the target audience here is a younger audience, so he says, take care of your health while you have it. It kind of doesn't necessarily fit in context, but I think it's those layers of meaning that I think are important. Now, I think there's one other way that we could look at this word, because you end up with a lot of roots that all are related or similar, but they're not necessarily the same word. So again, it's kind of funny over here. It could be creator, it could be health. Borei, briut. They're similar. They're definitely related words, but they're not exactly the same thing. I think there's another explanation over here that I believe that Yud over there is going to make this a really a different type of possessive over here, where instead of it being your creator, I think another way we can look at this phrase is your creativity. Okay, your ability to create. All right. So in other words, Zechor, going with that other explanation that Zechor would mean to take advantage of something, to use something while it's available. So in other words, he would be saying, utilize your creativity, your own ability as a borei, as a creator in the days of your youth, in the days of your adolescence, literally. Okay. So in other words, that's going back to the original root that it's borei, creator, but it's not your creator. It's the fact that you are a creator. Okay. There's a very typical Jewish concept. That was popularized about 300 years ago, 200 to 300 years ago. But it's older than that. When it says, for example, back in the beginning of Genesis, it says that man was created, humankind was created in the form of God, which is a very strange thing. We don't believe God has a form. Man is created in the form of God, and so there's this understanding that in the same way that God is a creator, has the ability to do things, to create things, humankind also has the same ability, has the ability to create. So in other words, other creatures don't have that. Animals are very limited in what they're able to create for themselves. Angels even are not creators. They're just messengers. They do something for God. We're the only ones who are given the power to create things on our own for our benefit or for our detriment. It goes either way. So in this sense, I think it's a part of what it's saying over here is while you have the ability to be creative, use your creativity. Nachshon's asking if anybody else had a problem with the volume go down.
It's pretty good most of the time, as long as
Okay.
you're close to the mic.
Okay, let me see if I can lean in a little bit more. All right. I hope that's a little better. Let's see what happens. Okay. Um, so train of thought. Let me just get back to my train of thought. So with this understanding, we would be going with the understanding that we're remembering our creativity in the days of our youth. Now, I think this is actually a very fitting explanation because let's look at the continuation of the verse. Continuation of the verse is, when should you remember this? In the days of your youth, before you reach the days of bad. I think that's pretty on the surface, days that are not quite as good. And the years come that you say, I do not have in them desire. Ainli vahem chefetz. Oh, okay. Great. I'm glad to see Nachshon says that it was only on his device. All right. I'm glad to hear. So, all right. So I think this is an interesting choice of word over here. Chefetz means desire. We've had that again. Sorry. Again, that's desire. Desire is an interesting thing because we use desire and both in Hebrew and in English in a number of different ways. The desire could be things that you want to do. It could also refer to more carnal desires, the needs, the physical needs of a person, whether it be in food or in other ways. Well, there's where you end up finding creativity or the creative power of humankind. There's a connection, clearly, obviously, between the creative or reproductive power of human beings and desire, right? God has linked those two together. There's a tremendous amount of desire surrounding reproduction. So in that sense, I think that there's again a connection over here. There are days when you no longer have desire in a number of different ways. So I think it's actually very fitting that the focus over here would be creation. Remember your creative ability before the time comes that desire starts to cut away. Because that's when desire starts to cut away, then creative ability starts to cut away. Again, there's this physical / spiritual connection between desire and creativity. Desire prompts creativity. It moves a person. It pushes a person towards a creative process. So I think that's an interesting I think that's a kind of a proof, I would say, to this translation of the word. I think all the meanings are true, but I like my take the best, if that makes sense, right? To remember your creativity, to utilize your creativity in your youth before desire, which is the prompting force of creativity, before that wanes, before that starts to go away. You know, in psychology, there's an understanding that that as a person ages, they move away from. So it's kind of understood that the middle-aged years, let's say between 30 and 60 or so, which is a large chunk of time, but between 30 and 60 is kind of the period of time where, in general, people devote themselves to bettering the people around them, to bettering their situation around them, to and reinforcing their relationships, to building families, to communities, work in the community, and things like that. And generally, again, these are very general and kind of too broad concepts. But once you get over the age of 60, you tend to find that people switch focuses. They tend to switch from that giving focus to more of a legacy creation focus. So I think that's also an interesting idea, that he's saying your creative years are specifically, again, this is, I'm saying from a psychological perspective, the creative years tend to only go up to a certain point. Again, it can shift for every person's going to be different, but there's a reduction in the push to be creative after a certain age in general. So he's saying in your youth, take advantage of that before the bad days come, which is a kind of an unfortunate phrase. Before the before the bad days come. He's going to qualify the next couple verses. And we'll see that in a second. The next couple verses are going to be discussing the slow waning of the senses as somebody ages, which I think has its own under the surface positive message that we'll get to hopefully by the end of this. But so we'll see that in a second. But let's finish up this verse. One more thing to see on this verse over here is a very interesting statement by the rabbis, by the sages. They say that the days that there is no desire is actually referring to the Messianic era. Okay, it's a veiled reference to a Messianic era, which is a strange thing to say. Where you're telling me that people are going to have less desire, less interest in a time of a perfect world, so to speak. And the understanding ends up being that when everybody around you is doing the right thing because there's this revelation of God, which we hope for, it kind of takes away the specialness of overcoming the hard parts of this world, of pushing yourself to be a better person, because in the face of adversity, overcoming adversity is a better feeling than just gliding easily. So there will be a reduction of desire in that time. That's kind of a more spiritualistic perspective. So I think this is kind of a fitting idea also, is that as long as we're in this period of time, which this is our life. We live in a life of a non messianic era, right? We don't live in a Mashiach time. So with that being the understanding, we have to face adversity, in which case we have the stronger ability to be creative and to do more things that we to make ourselves better, regardless of age, I would say. So that's kind of a veiled reference there that the sages understand. It's definitely not the simple understanding of the verse. As we will continue to see in the coming verses, we are clearly in the simple understanding of the verses that we are contrasting youth versus age, and he's saying to take advantage of youth while you have it. Fine. So now let's get into his statements on age. Again, this is interesting as closing verses of the book. It's a very interesting thing that this is where he wants to kind of end off the discussion. And he says, let's read the verse before we go any further, before we discuss any further. Ad asher lo techshach hashemesh. Before, so again, before you remember your health, remember your creativity, remember your creator in the days of your youth, before the bad days come. Ad, before asher lo techshach hashamesh, before before the sun darkens, v'ha'or v'hayareach v'hakochavim, and the light, typically light of fire, or is usually firelight, or the moon and the stars, before those lights go out, v'shavu ha'avim achar hagashem, and before the clouds return after the rain. Okay, very interesting phrasing there. Okay, so let's read that again. Again, it's a funny syntax that we don't really use in English. Ad asher lo techshach hashemesh, before. I'm just going to read that as before. It doesn't translate properly into English. It would be until that not it has gone dark the sun. And I guess you could say that. You'd sound like you're reading Don Quixote or something like that, right? It's so we'll just translate it more in a vernacular. Ad asher lo techshach hashemesh, before the sun darkens, v'ha'or v'hayareach v'kochavim, and the light of fire, or the moon and the stars, before they all darken, v'shavu ha'avim achar hagashem, and the clouds return after the rain. So as I said before, I believe that the coming verses, this verse included, is going to be a slow. He's going to be talking about the slow waning of the power of the senses, and he starts here with the sense of sight. Historically, sight was always the first sense to go. I don't know if it's still that way. I would say probably hearing is now probably the first sense to go. But throughout history, it's always been sight, and the reason is very simple. But we didn't have glasses, so I started wearing glasses when I was 9, 8, something like that, 7, I think. So if I started needing glasses at 7 years old, but did not have corrective lenses, so then by the time I would be 13, I would already be pretty nearsighted. By the time I would be 25, I'd be very nearsighted, and eventually I would not be able to see much of anything. So that's why historically, until glasses were invented, blindness would probably be, or the sight would probably be the first sense to go of the senses of the touch, smell, taste. So sight would probably be usually be the first one to go, which I think is why he puts this here as the first one. And he says that you would want to take advantage of sight specifically while you still have it, before the sun darkens, before the fire darkens, the moon, the stars. That's an interesting thing because the sun's the brightest of those. Fire would probably be the second brightest for us down here, then the moon, then the stars. So it's interesting that he goes down in the brightness of each of these things. I would think he would go up, but okay, this was his choice. I don't know. I don't have a specific explanation about why he goes from the brightest to the least bright. But he says before any of these things go dark, meaning that before you lose the ability to see these things, take advantage of them. Take advantage of the sight that you have to do things, to be creative in this world. Again, if we're understanding Borecha in the previous verses, your creativity, so that means that as long as you do have these things, then you still have creative ability. I think that, again, that's going to be the lesson that we're going to see in each one of these verses over here. As long as the person still has their capacities, as long as they still have their senses, that means that there's still a creative ability in their life. They still have the ability to be creative with their life. Okay, so again, this first verse here is talking about sight. So take advantage of sight, take advantage of your senses and be creative while you still have sight with you. Before the sun, the fire, the moon, the stars, before they darken, then take advantage of sight. Again, the kind of the veiled positive message over here is, first of all, if you still have it, that means you still have what to do. You still have abilities. And number two is, now that we do live in a time where we're able to maintain our sight. Most of us are able to maintain our ability to see pretty well into our old age. So then, all the more so, we're granted an extension of our creative abilities. I think that's a wonderful thing. My grandfather, who had of blessed memory, who had macular degeneration, so he had a spot in his eye, that a cloudy spot in his vision. So he only had peripheral vision. And I remember we would drive. I would drive. It took us a long time. Took him a while to give up his keys. But I remember driving him, and he would be guiding me because he lived in Northern California, which I'm not that familiar with. So he'd be driving around. He'd say, turn over there, go over there, because he had, just with his peripheral vision, he was able to see enough, and he was able to still do things. And that really says something. As long as you have some level of sight, so then you've still got what to do. You still have an ability to do to be creative, to be active and positive in your life. There's this interesting thing he says, but the shavu ha'avim achar agashim, if the clouds, but before the clouds return after the rain. I think that's a very interesting, just kind of a visual that he gives us, is that typically we understand that it's cloudy, it rains, the clouds go away, right? That's usually how it works, right? Usually after it rains, the sun shines, and then you're able to it's not cloudy anymore. Maybe not for us here in Portland. But I remember I was in New York in the summer once, and there was a hurricane came through the city that I was in. I wasn't in New York City. I was in somewhere up in the Catskill Mountains, and a hurricane came through. I remember waking up the next morning after the hurricane was over, and it was the bluest sky I've ever seen. It was the cleanest I've ever seen the sky. It was actually amazing to see, because usually the rain wipes away all the contaminants and cleans the sky, and there's no clouds. For the person who's losing their sight, unfortunately, the clouds stick around after the rain, right? The vision remains cloudy after the rain is gone. So I think it's kind of a nice visual over here. I don't know, something about it kind of touches me. But it's it's the same idea. So as long as a person has the sight, has the ability to see what's going on, then they have the creative power. They have something to do with their life. They're still able to do things. And it's not only that. That takes us to verse number 3. And even if a person doesn't have sight, but still retains other senses, again, sight being the first one to often go. So even if a person were to lose the sense of sight, but they still have other senses, then they're still going to have the ability to be creative. Again, I believe is the subtext over here. So the second sense we're going to go into is the ability to speak and to taste, to use our mouth. Okay. All right. So let's look at the verse over here. Bayom sheyazu shomrei habayis. On that day, when senses start waning, on that day that the guards of the house shiver. Okay, that's a funny word. We'll get into that in a second. V'his avsu and anshe hachayil, and the men of the strength, the men of the army, are bent. Uvatlu hatochanot, and the grinders, literally grinders, are out of commission. Kimi etu, because they have been there's so few of them. V'chashchu haroot ba'arubot, and the windows have darkened in the skylights. Okay, there's a lot of poetry over here. So let's read through it again. It's just, there's a lot of funny words. Bayom she'ezu shomrei habayit, the day that the guards of the house are shiver, they shake. V'hitav tu anshe hachayil, and the warriors are bent out of shape. Uvatla tochanot kimietu, and the grinders are out of work because there are so few of them. V'chashchu haraot barubot, and the windows have darkened in the ceiling, in the skylight. Okay, there's a lot of interpretations on this. Every commentary has a different take on this. The sages have their own take on this. The typical understanding is we're clearly talking about the slow waning of the senses, but there's different takes on what all these things mean, what each of them are referring to. Some understand that it's referring to the bones, right? The bones start to lose their strength. So that would be the guards of the house would be the skeleton, and The strong people would be the spine or something like that. There's other takes. Some say it's, I believe the sages say it's referring to the reproductive system, that it doesn't quite have the same, doesn't have the same vigor it used to. There's all different sorts of takes on this verse. I think personally, I think that this verse is referring to, again, the faculties of the mouth. So that would be primarily speech. Let's go with speech. Okay. And the way I'm envisioning this, again, it's poetic. We can all take it however we want to take it. The way I'm envisioning this, though, is what would be the Shomrei Habayit, the guards of the house. That would be the most outer layer, which would be the lips, right? The lips on the day that they shiver. And it's something you can tend to see as people do get older, that they will that oftentimes they'll develop more of a kind of a stutter or inability to form words in the same way. So it kind of makes sense. It would be the day that the lips start to quiver, and the ones who do war, right, the warriors, I would understand to be the tongue. Okay, the tongue, which is one of your greatest weapons. I think actually it's Rudyard Kipling, I think, says that words are the greatest weapon known to mankind. I think that it would make sense from Rudyard Kipling, right? So the warrior would be the tongue in this case, where the tongue is kind of bent out of shape. The grinders are pretty simple. I would say that's the teeth, right? And it would actually fit. They are out of work because there's so few of them. In fact, I mentioned Don Quixote earlier. I've been reading Don Quixote for a couple months now, slowly. And he talks, the translation I'm using, when he talks about teeth, he refers to them as the grinders, right? Again, it's a translation from the Spanish, so I don't know what if it's actually like that in Spanish, but he gets somebody throws something some rocks at his head at some point, and it knocks out a couple of his teeth. So they would be out of commission because they are so few, because teeth fall out. Again, our modern science has rectified a lot of this, right? We have the ability, we have teeth. We're able to maintain teeth. I mean, used to be by 30, you'd have lost half your teeth already, just from rot and things like that. We are able to rebuild teeth. We're able to create new teeth, dentures, and all sorts of things like that. Again, it's an amazing kindness from above that we're able to do that. But at least these three, the Shomrei Habayit, the Anshe Hachayel, and the Tochanot, we can all explain as being faculties of the mouth, things that you're able to do with your mouth, to eat, to talk, to do things like that. You run into a little bit of a problem if you're going with this explanation with this last one, and the windows in the skylight have darkened. That would sound like we're talking about vision again, which was already discussed in the previous verse. Although I did see that there was one explanation. It's actually an opinion in the Talmud or the Midrash, one of the two. I don't remember where it was, but there is an opinion that says that this is actually referring to the vocal cords, the voice box. So the skylight, the window in the sky, meaning the top of your throat, darkens, right? So that would be what it's a reference to, not the vision sky, the windows out, which actually make a little more sense, because why would he be talking, if he's talking about vision, why would it be the skylight go with windows? He's not talking about windows. He's talking about a skylight. So it would be more something that's on the top of something. So it would be, again, and in the context, we would take it as the ability to talk. So this would be the second sense that a person would commonly lose. Again, as we mentioned, if people were going blind by 30 or 40, they were also losing their teeth and their ability to vocalize words and make them comprehensible. My father of blessed memory, whose yard site was actually last week, I remember he grew up in a time, he wasn't that old when he passed, but I guess just in where he was at his age, they didn't have dental care like we have nowadays in the 40s when he was a kid. And so by the time that he reached his when he was older, he really didn't have many of his original teeth left, and he had a hard time eating a lot of things because he didn't really have teeth. He probably could have done a little more to take care of that. I don't think he liked dentists that much, uh, but anyway, so I remember watching him and watching how he would have a hard time, and just gave me a sense of what things were like before we had a good dentistry. It's again really a blessing that we have such things. So again, while this could seemingly be a pretty dark verse, it also prompts you to say, wow, if you do have the ability to form words, to taste food, to eat things, to chew things, then you still have your creative abilities. You still have what to go on. And I think that's again the perhaps a little veiled, but I don't even think it's that veiled. I think it's really the point. The point is you are creative. You can be creative and positive and forward moving as long as you still have this sense. Even if, God forbid, a person was missing the last sense of vision, if they can still taste and talk and eat, then they're still creative people. They still have abilities. We're running low on time, but I don't want to spend too much time on this anyway. So this is our fourth verse over here. All right, this is going to be our third sense that starts to fall away. Visugru delatayim bashuk, and the doors are closed in the market. Bishval kol hatachana, from the low sound of the grinding. All right, interesting. We had grinding in the last verse. We have grinding in this verse. Viakum lekol atzipor, and the person arises to the sound of the bird. V'yishachu kol benot hashir, and puts down or lowers down all of the those who are singing, literally the girls who are singing. Okay, it's a convoluted verse. Let's take it again, just word by word. Vesugru delatayim bashuk, the doors are closed in the marketplace, literally locked up. Sagar means locked up. Ishval kol tachana, because of the low sound of the grinding. Viakum lekol atzipor, and the person rises with the sound of the bird. V'yishachu kol benot hashir, and lowers down those who are singing, or the forms of music. There's kind of different ways you could render that. So let's just discuss a couple of these verses over here. Sagar, again, as I said, is to lock down, is locked up. The doors are locked. Bashuk, the shuk is a marketplace. Still to this very day in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, the shuk is a marketplace. There's the Machane Yehuda shuk in Jerusalem. With the bishval kol tachna, with the low sound of the grinding. I think this is important. We have sounds all around us nowadays. We have loud sounds. We don't think twice when we hear an airplane go over our heads. In previous times, they would never hear something as loud as an airplane, unless it was a volcano erupting or something like that. Nothing was ever that loud, which kind of makes you wonder what that does to us psychologically or subconsciously on a evolutionary level when we have these loud sounds surrounding us all the time. The loudest thing that you could probably think of back then was a factory, a grinding factory or something like that. That was a loud piece of machinery. In fact, the Talmud, or the Talmud itself, considers a mill to be one of the loudest places you could ever go. So mill workers have special rules that apply to them because they're in these loud environments. So if the sound of something as loud as a grinder, as a mill, is low, that means that the third sense that we're talking about is hearing. Okay, so the doors of the marketplace, meaning in other words, the person loses their ability to go out and engage in business when they're unable to hear anymore. Okay, when the sound of the grinding is low, then you know that sense is starting to go also. This is an interesting one also. The akum lekol atzipor, he gets up, literally he gets up, but that person gets up to the sound of the bird. So there's kind of two explanations that I would see about this phrase over here. Is if somebody's losing their hearing, all the sounds come at them with equal importance. The brain loses its ability to filter the sounds. So a bird chirping would be would the person would be unable to distinguish, is that an important sound that I have to get up for or not? I actually knew somebody who had a brain injury and they lost the ability to filter sounds. So all sound came at them with the same importance, including a cricket. You hear cricket outside, or the air conditioner go on, or if there's a light bulb buzzing, all of it would come to them at the same level of importance, and they had to work very hard to filter through and figure out what was the important one. So that would be one explanation of that. Is why would somebody losing their hearing get up for the sound of a bird? Would be that all the sounds are coming to them. They're unable to filter the sounds apart from each other. Another kind of thought that I had was it's not necessarily a bird itself, it's the sound of a bird chirping. My mother tells me about this. She says that she often will have to she'll wake up in the middle of the night with a tinnitus, with ringing in the ears. That sounds to me like the sound of a bird, the chirping of a bird or something like that. So again, as hearing goes, people get ringing and other things in their ears. So that's kind of another way I would perceive this. This is interesting. They literally would mean that they tell those who are singing to be quiet. I think that's a common feature of people as they get older and their hearing starts to go. They have a harder time. This is my experience with people over my life, is that they go to the weddings and they want the music a little lower. The kids, they want the music as loud as possible. Just an interesting thought. I did see one of the commentaries say that this could also be read as Vayisachu Kol Benot Hashir, Sach, which is not, it's not Sach, but you can almost read it as Sach, which would mean conversation, which would mean that all music comes to them as conversation. It's not quite as musical anymore. So again, as this would be the third sense that would go, would be hearing. Again, I think that's in a previous time, you'd have sight go, then the ability to chew, the teeth would go, and then hearing would probably be the third thing to go. All right, that's enough of that. Again, the basic premise is that as long as you do have any of your faculties left, you still have a creative ability. I think that's what gets lost over here. Is he's not saying how terrible it is to get old. It's not easy, right? But he's saying if you're still active, if you're still able to do things with your life, then you still have a creative ability, and there's what for you to do. Okay, that's it for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Again, now we're a good 4 verses into the last chapter, so we're tell your friends, and